My name is Beauty Matongo. I'm the head of Archives. We are celebrating the Heritage Week. As archivists, our concern in this celebration has to do with the management of records and the archiving of documentary heritage. Our concern is to ensure that these records are well protected, are well preserved. And we look at the pre-colonial time. This archiving and records management is not a new function. It dates back to the 19th century when the missionaries had introduced the skills of reading and writing to the various communities in Namibia. From then on, the community leaders, they started to correspond with one another. They started to correspond with the traders. Not only did the community leaders created the records, because during their day-to-day business transactions, they created documents, they documented all their activities. But government or administration also, they created document of historical value, starting with the German administration government, the South African administration government. They all generated and created records of importance, records of historical value. And this is the most important that we are talking about today as the archival institution, that we want to restore that which was started by the colonial time, by the pre-colonial time, to ensure that these records are kept for current and future generations. And we look at the National Archives, the different types of records that we have kept, we have preserved. For instance, among the community leaders, we have records that were created by Hendrik Witbooi, Mahareros, and many others. And these records, they give us an example of what it means to keep records. They give us evidence of what was happening in the past and what was happening in the life of Witbooi, in the life of Maharero. And to us, the new generation is an example to show us that whatever we have created, we need to preserve. As an archival institution, our most concern is to document the records which reflect the identities and the inspiration of the Namibian people, that in future generations to come, they should see what was happening in Namibia. And thank you.
Good day, everyone. My name is Albertina Nekongo, and I'm an archivist for research, information, and publication at the National Archives of Namibia. Documentary heritage is a useful tool to understanding social and cultural and political dynamics. Therefore, I'm taking you through this exhibition about the archival legacy of Captain Hendrik Witbooi. During the 18th century, Nama-speaking people lived in what is today's southern Namibia and the northern Cape in South Africa. Those north of the Orange River were also known as the Great Namakwa, and those on the south of the river as Little Namakwa. One of the first European travelers who visited Namibia, the Frenchman Francois Levaillant, painted portraits of the Nama he encountered in 1784. They lived off their heads of cattle and sheep. And the portraits show that they were armed with spears and clothed in fur and leather that was ornamented with beards. Levaillant renders their name as Kaminokwa, which is clearly the Bond of Swords people. It's notable that the Nama people were coming under pressure from two sides. From the north, their pasture grounds were encroached upon by Ovaherero and their cattle. From the south, Dutch Boer settlers took their land and made them laborers on their former land. In the process, those Nama not only adopted European-style clothing and learned Dutch language, in addition to their Nama language, Khoikhoi Korab, they also got acquainted with new skills and technologies, such as horse riding, ox wagons, and the use of firearms. Some of them rebelled against the Boers and moved northwards away from advancing settler frontier. They became known as Orams. The first Oram group settling Namibia was the Afrikaner clan, whose ancestor Jager Afrikaner killed the Boer Pienaar in 1796 and moved across the Orange River in 1803. His son Jonker Afrikaner moved further northwards and established an early state formation in alliance with Shamwaha, the father of Maharero, with the centers in Okahanja and in Windhoek. Jonker Afrikaner was one of the amazing leaders, of early resistance leaders who also learned how to read and write. And this amazing piece of writing here is the earliest or oldest manuscript that we have in the National Archives of Namibia with Jonker Afrikaner's own signature. And it was the permission that he granted the missionary Joseph Tidal to settle in Windhoek in 1844. Documentary heritage is a fundamental legacy of our culture and historical memory that have to be passed on to future generations in the best condition. The Witbooi clan is one of the Oram groups that documented their history. The Witboois were the last of the Oram who moved into Namibia. According to oral traditions that they were only written down much later, they were originally from Cape Town, but already lived in Little Namakwaland in the middle of the 18th century. Their first leader or captain was called Ncwesebo. After his early death, they were led by his widow. And her son, with her second husband, was born in 1780 and became known as Kivido, or in short, Kido Witbooi. He was the captain who led the Witboois further north, at first to Pella, where they got into contact with Christian missionaries who baptized some of them and taught how to read and write. Invited by Jonker Afrikaner, they moved into Great Namakwaland, but did not join him at Windhoek. They finally settled in 1863 at Kahatsus on the river Fish, or Fish River. Kido Witbooi, who was well literate and familiar with the Dutch Bible, although he was only baptized at a very advanced age, renamed the place after the biblical Gibeon. Among the Witbooi clan, there was a powerful, renowned Namibian leader. At the time when European imperialism began to carve up Africa into colonies, his name is Captain Hendrik Witbooi. He was born in Pella, Cape Colony in 1830. He is a son of Captain Moses Witbooi. He was crowned or installed as a chief, or as a captain of the Witboois in 1884, after the death of his father. He resisted colonialism by Germany with a diplomatic campaign against signing the so-called protection treaties, and waged war against German Schutztruppe in 1893 to 1894. After being attacked by Kurt von Francois at his homestead in Auckland, he was forced to sign a protection treaty with Germany in 1894. He lived in Gibeon and Richmond afterwards from 1894 to 1904. He declared war against Germany again in October 1904. He was mortally wounded at Farkras on 29 October 1905 that succumbed to his death. Hendrik Witbooi is greatly honored as an early resistance leader, widely recognized amongst others by having his portrait at Namibian dollars banknotes. He was a good record manager and a record keeper. He documented, he made sure that whatsoever transaction was done was documented. He himself, he could write because he was educated, but he also had scribes who wrote for him. So if any letter comes to him, he made sure it's copied into the record books. And some of them are those that are well known now as the Hendrik Witbooi diaries. Amongst those documentations, there are also records or track of his purchases from traders and also payments made. So he made sure that whatsoever comes into his kingdom and every transaction made is documented. This exhibit shows the archival legacy of Captain Hendrik Witbooi, his diaries and debt books. And this is a letter copy book or a diary of Hendrik Witbooi that was looted at Hokrans in 1893. The red marking on the opened page 144 is by Card von Francois, and like other such markings, shows what was Francois' main interest in the looted book, namely to find out who supplied Witbooi with ammunition. Hendrik Witbooi's books or diaries and all his documents, they were well articulated. They present detailed information of what was happening. Therefore, it was used as enough proof that also helped in crafting or writing of the well-known Blue Book that have all the encounters, of how the Namibians were treated by the German administration. On October 1904, incidentally on the same day that General von Trotha issued his infamous extermination order against the Ovaherero people, Hendrik Witbooi formally declared war on the Germans. Unlike Kurt von Francois, he did not launch a surprise attack at town. The Witbooi people fled Gibeon, which had a strong German garrison. They gathered their forces elsewhere and attacked farms and small military posts to get more weapons and ammunition. At the same time, Hendrik Witbooi sent out letters and messages to other Nama captains to join him, and most did. They were suffering under the same problems as the Witbooi: loss of land, unfair treatment, racism attitudes. This file portrays the proclamation that was issued by General von Trotha to the Nama, putting a price of 250 pounds or 5,000 mark on Hendrik Witbooi's head on the 23rd of April 1905. Noted earlier, there has been repatriation of documentary heritage that includes the Witbooi diaries, and this here is the Bible, or the Hendrik Witbooi Bible, that was returned to Namibia from Germany in 2019. This area, or this section, is a section of the publications that we have in the National Archives of Namibia about Captain Hendrik Witbooi. Some of them are direct translation of his work or the diaries. It also encompasses a rich history of Captain Hendrik Witbooi and what he have done for the Namibian nation, or for Namibia as a nation. The Hendrik Witbooi papers or diaries, the second edition, which was translated by Anna Mary Haywood and Eben, is still available for purchase in the National Archives of Namibia.
Good afternoon. My name is Werner Hillebrecht. I'm originally from Germany, and I came to Namibia about 30 years ago. One can say because of Hendrik Witbooi, because when I first read about Hendrik Witbooi, about 40 years ago, then the person fascinated me immediately, and I wanted to learn more about him, and that led me to getting involved with Namibia in general, and so in the end I ended up at the National Archives with the Hendrik Witbooi papers. What did me fascinate about Hendrik Witbooi? First, of course, the fact that he fought against the mighty German Empire notwithstanding that it could be, his forces could be seen as so small and really not equipped to take up this fight. But he did it nevertheless, and he was guided by a philosophy. He certainly has not studied philosophy, but he had his guiding principles, which I think one could call his philosophy. And I've tried to enumerate them. He is guided by the principles of sovereignty and autonomy, by equity and fairness, by law and order, by, that seems to be a bit strange in this context, by politeness, by the African concept of Ubuntu, although he never mentioned it as such, and by honesty. I think all those were his guiding principles. And I want to elaborate that with his writings and only comment a little bit in between. So about the concept of sovereignty and autonomy, I cite from a letter he wrote to Maharero in 1890, just after Maharero had signed a treaty, protection and friendship treaty with the German Empire. And he voices his disagreement with that and said, or wrote, "This dry land is known by two names only, Herero land and Nama land. Herero land belongs to the Herero nation and it is an autonomous realm. The Nama land belongs to all the red nations. The Nama were generally referring to themselves as the red people. And those two are autonomous realms, just as it's said of the white man's countries, Germany and England and so on, whatever these countries are called. These countries across the sea are also autonomous realms. And all the different nations have their own leader, and each leader has his own people, and land where he alone commands and rules. No other captain or leader has any right to force his will. For every leader on this earth is merely a steward for our common great God and is answerable to this great God alone, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords." So, leaving the religious side aside, this is actually the principle of the United Nations that he's spelling out here. That all nations are equal, they have the equal rights, and they are autonomous. He goes on, "But you, dear Captain, have now accepted another rule, and have handed yourself over to a human supremacy for protection against all dangers. Primarily and most immediately against me in this war, which has for so long been waged between you and me, to be protected and helped by the German government. But, dear Captain, do you realize what you have done, or for whom you did what you have done? It seems to me that you took too little account of yourself and your land and your people and your heirs, nor have you thought about your captaincy. You may think that you will keep all these things as an independent captain after you have destroyed me, if you succeed. But, my dear Captain, you will come to rue it bitterly. You will eternally regret that you have given your land and your right to rule into the hands of the white man. For this war between us is not nearly as heavy a burden as you seem to have thought when you did this momentous thing. It is a war arising from finite causes and finite issues, which in the fullness of time will be brought to a proper peace. But what you have done now, surrendering yourself over to government by another, by white people, thinking it wisely planned, that will become to you like carrying the sun on your back. I doubt that you have well considered and fully grasped what it means to surrender to German protection. I doubt that you and your Herero nation will understand the rules and laws and methods of that government, and will accept them in peace and contentment for long. For I tell you, you will not understand Göring's dispensation. You will not be satisfied, for he will not act according to your will or traditional law or customs. Then it will be too late, for you have already given him every right, and he will no longer bend to your ways. You will not bow to him either, but that will be of no avail. You are already completely in his power. And now that you have turned yourself over to another powerful government, how stands your autonomous captaincy now? Are you still paramount chief of Hereroland? I can't see how you can call yourself that, since you have put someone else over you and have submitted to him and his protection. Whoever stands above is paramount. Whoever stands below is subordinate, because he stands under another. You have disdained all the grave words and dispositions which we discussed at Gohaganas, words which I spoke to you. Now you have brought human powers and helpers into this process, the working of which have been revealed to you. Hendrik Witbooi had a meeting with Kurt von Francois, who succeeded the first German representative Göring. And von Francois tried to get Witbooi as far as also signing such a protection treaty. So, and this talk was actually minuted by one of his Hendrik Witbooi scribes. I think in this case it was Samuel Isaac. And so the minute says, question by Witbooi, what is protection? What are we being protected against? From what danger or difficulty or suffering can one chief be protected by another? The commissioner, Kurt von Francois, answers, from the Boers and other mighty nations who want to enter this country by force, to settle and to do business wherever they please without seeking permission from anyone. Witbooi answered, that I cannot see. It is incomprehensible and strange. I cannot see how it is possible. An independent and autonomous chief is chief of his people and land because every ruler is chief over his people and country, to protect it himself against any danger or disaster which is threatening to harm his people or land. That is why there are separate kingdoms and each ruler rules his own people and country. It is thus, when one chief stands under the protection of another, the underling is no longer independent and no longer master of himself. So I see no truth or sense in the suggestion that a chief who has surrendered may keep his autonomy and do as he likes. And now comes a piece that is actually very important because it is where Witbooi defines or brings an early definition of Pan-Africanism and solidarity. He says, this part of Africa is the realm of us red chiefs. If danger threatens one of us, which he feels he cannot meet on his own, then he can call on a brother or brothers among the red chiefs, saying, come brothers, let us together oppose this danger which threatens to invade our Africa, for we are one in color and customs, and this Africa is ours. For the fact that we, various red chiefs, occupy our realms and homegrounds is but a lesser division of the one Africa. Together with autonomy comes equity in means, and the means that Hendrik Witbooi is asking to have equitably are weapons, firearms. So he says, God gave you people the skill and knowledge to make firearms, you the Europeans, as part of his great design. He has appointed war to punish the sins and injustices of nations. I think arms must be as free as rain which falls where it wants to fall today, on any soil or any person, and cannot be stopped. You are wrong to think that stopping the flow of arms will bring peace. That is not a healing plan, neither right nor good. A man who stops arms is like a man who keeps another from water. That, of course, was the era before automatic firearms and weapons of mass destruction. One must see the difference here. But what Witbooi is referring to is that the Germans had put up an arms embargo. They did not allow arms any longer to be imported into Namibia, but of course they had their own arms. Those were imported all the time, but none anymore to Nama and Ovaherero. So, von Frank's answers, as far as firearms are concerned, don't worry. No one in the territory will be allowed a gun. It will be quite unnecessary for a man to defend himself with a gun, since the government will protect all. Meaning, the Germans will be the government and they have all the guns. Hendrik Witbooi was writing to Joseph Fredericks, the captain who had first, as the first one, taken up a protection treaty with Germany in Britannia, and who now wanted to sell a piece of his land to a white farmer by the name of Hermann. And he writes to him, I do not want you to give any white man a farm on my land. Okay, that piece of land was also claimed by Witbooi, but boundaries were rather fluid in those times. There were disputes about that. I do not even like you giving a white man a farm on your land, for I think this part of Africa is the territory of red chiefs. Again, we are one in color and customs, we obey the same laws, and these laws are agreeable to us and to our people. For we are not severe with each other, but accommodate to each other amicably and in brotherhood. And if the people of one chief want to live with another chief's people in his settlement, they can do so in peace, and both chiefs are content. They do not make prohibiting laws against each other concerning water, grazing, or roads, nor do they charge money for any of these things. No, we hold these things to be free to any traveler who wishes to cross our land, be he red, white, or black. The Germans quite differently. They claim that they want to protect you against other mighty nations, but it seems to me that they themselves are the mighty nation seeking to occupy our country by force. Already they are governing us by force and prohibiting laws. I see nothing good in the coming of the Germans. They boast of their power and they use it. Now, I think one major fault with Hendrik Witbooi is that he maybe had illusions about the rivalry between the imperious powers, Germany and Britain. Britain at that time had occupied Walfish Bay. There was a magistrate by the name of John Cleverly. And so he wrote to John Cleverly complaining about the Germans. And he wrote, some African rulers surrender to German protection are today bitterly sorry, for they have not seen any of the beautiful promises kept. The Germans told them that they would protect them against the mighty invaders threatening to take our land by force without permission from the chiefs. But from what I hear and see of the man, it now appears the German himself is that man. Right and truth does not interest him. He does not consult the country's chiefs, for he himself makes the laws for our country, following only his own judgment. And these laws are quite unsupportable, incomprehensible, and unbearable, intolerant, pitiless, uncouth. He establishes prohibiting laws in our country and on our farms. He forbids us to hunt our own game, which is the God-given supply from which we live. He is sentencing our people in Windhoek and has already executed men for owing money, which is not a sufficient and worthy crime for capital punishment. I am referring to 5 people, 4 Bergkammerer and 1 red man of mine. German officials told my officials how they have beaten the men in a disgraceful and brutal manner, as the dumb and ignorant creatures they think us. We never use such brutal and improper punishments. He is writing in a similar line later on, even to the governor of the Cape, which at that time was one Sir Henry Locke. I feel again constrained to inform Your Excellency on the situation in this country. And then he makes reference to the Berlin Conference, or so-called Congo Conference, where the European colonial powers sat together and put up rules how they would take colonies in Africa. And Witbooi seems to have been quite well informed about the agreements at that conference. We don't know this, haven't found out how, but he writes, for these men, the Germans, are acting upon agreements and sanctions formulated at your conference, agreements to which they appear not at all to adhere. We have heard that they came to our country with the consent of you all, to put an end to this war in our country and to restore peace by cautious negotiated demand, not through violence, and to seek to conclude protection treaties with us, again without violence, but with our willing consent. Now we find that the longer the Germans stay, the more they enforce their own legislation and administration. Their laws and practices are intolerable. The chiefs who have surrendered to German protection did not yield their lands to the Germans. There is no mention of that in the treaties. But the Germans grant permission to others to live on land which they had not asked for from the chiefs and had not been given. They are doing this on my land too, although, as I told Your Excellency, I have never accepted German protection for my nation or lands. I cannot understand the ways of these men at all. At first they said, and all white and red people said and held this to be true, that my war was just and unlawful and that it interfered with productive enterprise and labor in the country. Then the Lord, through his grace and power, brought to pass agreement between Samuel Maharero and myself. Already we are negotiating, and I trust all will go well, since we have no doubt that this peace is real. And now it appears that the Germans themselves want to make war. They claimed they had come in peace, but that is not true. I now see bloodsheds at their hands, for they are fully prepared for war. They claimed they would protect us from the Boers who wanted to take over our land, but now they themselves have invited the Boers into our country and have given them land without the consent of our country's chiefs. But from this a great war will come now that we have made our peace, and the Germans will have forced it by occupying our land and settlements without permission. Now, this all was written before von Francois actually attacked Witbooi. So he really saw it coming. Let me say a little bit about politeness. What is quite striking about Witbooi's correspondence is that he is always keeping well all forms of politeness in addressing other captains, in addressing the Germans, in addressing traders, and the same in the ending formula at the letter. I am greeting you, and so on and so on. So it comes out very clearly in a letter to this magistrate Cleverly in Walfish Bay, where he wrote, "I'm addressing these lines to you personally. I wrote a letter to Captain von Francois in Windhoek, and he took offense because I had not used the appropriate titles and modes of address." That man was very conscious of himself. "I now beg your honor to let me have some samples of letters with the correct titles customary among you great men, for I have no examples of the correct format and envelopes with which I can follow. I do not even your name or how to address you, which is why I simply called you the British magistrate. Dear sir, kindly tell me your name. It was my ignorance that made me address you in that manner." I think politeness is also a matter of ethics. And I think part of that politeness is also that as he was writing to Samuel Maharero, when Samuel had succeeded his father Maharero, "For I believe that a man is being capable of change. He can gain insight all at once and turn. And I thought that if you do not want to continue your father's work, you have the choice of a better life for yourself. That through your father's works you may have gained insight and turn. That is why I asked about understanding on conversion. But if you do not understand and do not want conversion, just tell me directly that you will not turn from the attitude and practices of your father for which I smote him. So say it straight out." Yeah, I come now to the concept of Ubuntu, which Witbooi does not use that term, but he uses the concept. In another letter to Joseph Fredericks, it is the farm that he wanted Joseph Fredericks not to give to a white farmer. He says, "I repeat, I consider this farm mine by the law of conquest. All of old Oasep's lands and possessions became mine, as you well know. However, this is no great harm or loss to you. For, as I explained in my letter, among red chiefs, people can happily live together in one place without restriction or prohibition, hardship or envy, and in mutual accommodation. But with the Germans, it is different." Then there is one document in Hendrik Witbooi's diary a contract. The heading actually says formula lease contract, which means that he wanted to apply this not only to one person, but to others in similar way. An agreement with a François Daniel Fouis, obviously a Boer farmer, who wanted to lease some land from Witbooi. Marked well, to lease it, not to buy. The agreement which I show in confirmation to Mr. François Daniel Fouis or any other person who has leased land from me is as follows. You have shown me all your plans and intentions concerning the leasehold in writing, and I have agreed because your plans are suitable. I told you that I would like to share my thoughts with you, but that you might be offended if I should express them fully. Therefore, as I told you, I have not told you all my thoughts and intentions, and there was reason for this. Here are my thoughts and intentions in writing as documentation. And I guess the reasons for this not telling is at the end, where this document is actually signed, not by himself, but he had to discuss it. Also signed by 16 other people from his council. Number one, should someone lease land from me and I accept him, I shall demand from him £12 per annum. This is provisional. Once I have assessed his worth, my price will be changed as follows. Second, if he applies his own rules on his land and shows more concern for what is due to him than for my poor people, and is unkind to them when they come to him to fill their mouth, and closes his heart to their want, then he shall pay me 24 per year, double. Number three, if friendly people come that way on business or moving through with their herds, and he asks them money for grazing or water, because he is hard to strangers, be they white, red or black, he shall pay me 36 pounds per year. Number four, if he cannot abide by my laws and resists my representatives with roughness and scorn, or if he knowingly quarrels with my nation, and I see this with my own eyes, then he shall be turned off my land. For I cannot abide two dogs who will not drink from the same bowl. So he put into this lease contract not the winner takes all, buyer takes all concept of European land ownership, but puts in social conditions. And I think this concept is not new in African matters of dealing with land. You find that concept as well traditionally in communal lands, but he tried to put it in the form of a European contract, and that is a new thing. And lastly, honesty. Witbooi put great weight on honesty, and he found the German dealings thoroughly honest. He has already alluded to it in some of the other citations. So he found that, for example, in something that is also in this exhibition, the attack on Hornkrantz. After the attack, he wrote to Hermanus van Leek of Rehoboth. Captain von Francois sent a message with 2 of my great men from Windhoek telling me that within a few days I would receive an application for a treaty. I have been waiting for this letter, since I was not mobilized and knew of no mobilization against me, and my men were off our guard and unprepared. Such little arms and ammunition as I have was not being carried but stored in boxes. The captain attacked us early in the morning while we were unsuspectingly asleep, and although I took my men out, we were unable to beat them back. And the captain entered the camp and sacked it in so brutal a manner as I would have never thought a member of a white civilized nation capable of, a nation which knows the rules and ways of war. But this man robbed me and killed little children at their mother's breast, and older children and women and men. Corpses of people who had been shot, he burned inside our grass huts, burning their bodies to ash. Sadly and terrifyingly, the captain went to work in a shameful operation. So he was deceived by von Francois that he was at peace, and then attacked. While Witbooi actually, when he was admittedly forced by Theodor von Leutwein, in the end, after the Naukluft War, to sign a treaty with the German emperor, he kept to that treaty probably longer than he should have kept it, but he felt bound by his word. And only when the German conduct of the war with the Oberherero was getting into a genocide, and when many other things had happened, that also in his own land, with the conduct of German settlers, then at some point he said, enough is enough, but he did not attack the German military out of the blue. He sent a formal declaration of war to Governor Leutwein, and thereafter he started with the war.